Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women and Children First, the virtual edition. I'm Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We are one of the last feminist bookstores left in the United States, and we're based here in Chicago. And we are so honored to host this virtual celebration for the release of Dear Memory, Letters on Writing, Silence, and Grief by Victoria Chang. We're also thrilled to have Dana Levin here to join us for this conversation. And now we begin our virtual event, as we begin all of our events that were once held in this store, with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which our bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native literature and community. And I encourage all of you to learn more about what land acknowledgements are and the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. Women and Children First is now open at limited capacity still. And we also continue to offer curbside pickup if you want to do that, and we ship anywhere in the United States. All of our events for now are going to continue on Crowdcast until hopefully early 2022. If you want to ask a question of the authors tonight, please do so by putting your question in the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of the screen. Also, there's a very handy Buy the Book button located at the bottom of the screen. That's going to take you to womenandchildrenfirst.com, where you can buy Dear Memory or Dana's book as well. All right. Now on to the event. Victoria Chang's poetry books include OBIT, Barbie Chang, The Boss, Salvinia Molesta, and Circle. OBIT received the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Prize and the Griffin Poetry Prize, and was long-listed for the National Book Award, among many other accolades. Chang is also the author of the children's picture book that I love, Is Mommy, illustrated by Marla Frazee, and named a New York Times notable book, and also a middle grade novel, Love, Love. Her many awards and fellowships include a Guggenheim, a Sustainable Arts Foundation Fellowship, and a Pushcart Prize, among many, many others. She lives in Los Angeles and is the program chair of Antioch University's low-residency program. Dana Levin is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently Banana Palace and Sky Burial, which the New Yorker called utterly her own and utterly riveting. Her poems and essays have appeared in Best American Poetry, the New York Times, the American Poetry Review, The Nation, Poetry, and Guest House, among many others. Levin currently serves as a distinguished writer in residence at Marla University in St. Louis. Copper Canyon Press will publish Dana's 5th book of poems, Now Do You Know Where You Are, in spring of 2022, and we cannot wait. I just love this book, Dear Memory. Page after page just knocked the air out of me. I found myself double dog-earing pages into tiny little accordions, which is especially painful because the book itself is such a beautiful treasure, such an artifact in and of itself. Dear Memory is a vulnerable exploration of the intimate and often inextricable relationship between silence and grief, and how they tunnel inside one another. But it's also so much more than that. And so I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Please join me in welcoming Dana Levin and Victoria Chang.
Oh, thank you. So I guess I'm gonna thank you so much. That was so nice. And I just want to do a plug for Sarah and her bookstore. And so I hope you will support Sarah. And if you do plan on getting any books at all, beyond even ours, to please support them and support independent feminist bookstores. So thanks for coming. And I'm so glad to have my friend Dana here. I'm going to just do a little bit of reading and screen sharing initially, and then we're just gonna have a conversation after that, and I think it'll be really fun. So I am gonna read a few poems from my book of poetry first, but I'm gonna share my screen with you. Crowdcast makes me a little stressed out, so just to bear with me. Okay, so here's my little thing, and I actually made a thingamabob for the dear memory, and then I thought, well, I'll make it for these poems as well in case you're a visual learner, which I totally am. So I'll just read maybe like 3 poems from here, and then I might end with one from this book as well, and then I'll move to dear memory. But this is my book of poems that came out last year, and it's just a book of poems in the shape of obituaries. And my mother passed away in 2015 from pulmonary fibrosis, and my dad had a stroke a long time ago, and so he kind of floats through these poems sometimes like a little ghost. Okay, this one's called Music. Music died on August 7th, 2015. I made a video with old pictures and music for the funeral. I picked Hallelujah in a cappella because they weren't really singing, but actually crying. When my children came into the room, I pretended I was writing. Instead, I looked at my mother's old photos, the fabric patterns on all her shirts, the way she held her hands together at the front of her body. In each picture, the small brown purse that now sits under my desk. At the funeral, my brother-in-law kept turning the music down. When he wasn't looking, I turned the music up because I wanted these people to feel what I felt. When I wasn't looking, he turned it down again. At the end of the day, someone took the monitor and speakers away, but the music was still there. This was my first understanding of grief. This one is called My Mother's Teeth. Died twice. Once in 1965, all pulled out from gum disease. Once again on August 3rd, 2015. The fake teeth sit in a box in the garage. When she died, I touched them, smelled them, thought I heard a whimper. I shoved the teeth into my mouth, but having 2 sets of teeth only made me hungrier. When my mother died, I saw myself in the mirror, her words in a ring around my mouth like powder from a donut. Her last words were in English. She asked for a Sprite. I wonder whether her last thought was in Chinese. I wonder what her last thought was. I used to think that a dead person's words die with them. Now I know that they scatter, looking for meaning to attach to, like a scent. My mother used to collect orange blossoms in a small, shallow bowl. I passed the tree each spring. I always knew that grief was something I could smell, but I didn't know that it's not actually a noun, but a verb, that it moves. And then I will maybe read this one. Blame. Wants to die, but cannot. Its hair is untidy, but it's always here. My mother blamed my father. I blamed my father's dementia. My father blamed my mother's lack of exercise. My father is the story, not the storyteller. I eventually blamed my father because the story kept on trying to become the storyteller. Blame has no face. I've walked on its staircase around and around, trying to slap its face, but only hitting my own cheeks. When some people suffer, they want to tell everyone about their suffering. When the brush hits a knot, the child cries out loud, makes a noise that is an expression of pain, but not the pain itself. I can't feel the child's pain, but some echo of her pain based on my imagination. Blame is just an echo of pain, a veil across the face of the one you blame. I blame God. I want to complain to the boss of God about God. What if the boss of God is rain, and the only way to speak to rain is to open your mouth to the sky and drown? So I think I'll move over to Dear Memory, and I'll read one more obit at the end, I think, if I feel like it. This book is actually, I think I see Vandana Khanna in the audience, and this book actually was very much so inspired by Van, who was, we were once having a conversation about how there aren't a lot of books of essays written by Asian American women, and how she was looking for them for teaching or just for, personal edification and couldn't find them. And I said, oh, I have these, these feelings, that same feeling. And she said, I need my pages. And I always joke about that, because just that one kind of encouragement and phrase got me even thinking about the possibility of writing prose things. And these are definitely things, because they really are some kind of hybrid. And I basically, didn't want to write anything about my mother ever again. And I had to clean out a storage facility, and I found all these boxes, because my mother was quite the hoarder, and found all these papers and letters and photos and all sorts of stuff. And I ended up feeling like I had so many questions, but no one to ask them to. So that kind of led me to just write a letter to my mother. And the very first letter I wrote is one that I'll read for you. And this is just a little bit of it, because I couldn't fit it all in here, but I'll read it to you. Dear Mother, I have so many questions. What city were you born in? What was your American birthday, your Chinese birthday? What did your mother do? What did your grandmother do? Who was your father, grandfather? It's too late now, but I would like to know. I would like to know why your mother followed Chiang Kai-shek, taking you and your 6 or 7 siblings across China to Taiwan. I would like to know what was said in the planning meeting. I would like to know who was in that meeting, where that meeting took place. I would like to know the people who were left behind, to know if there are other people who look like me. I would like to know if you took a train, if you walked, if you had pockets in your dress, if you wore pants, if your hand was in a fist, if you held a small stone, if you thought the trees were black or green at night, if it was cold enough to see your breath, to sting your fingers. I would like to know who you spoke to along the way, if you had some preserved salty plums, which we both love, in your pocket. I would like to know if you carried a bag, if you had a book in your bag, where you got your food for the trip, why I never knew your mother, father, or your siblings. I would like to have known your father, to know what his voice sounded like, if it was brittle or pale, if it was blue or red, to know the sound he made when he swallowed food. I would like to know if your mother was afraid. During college, I spent several weeks with her in Taiwan. She bought me baozi, or buns, every morning, the bao that steamed in small plastic bags with no ties, and sweet doujiang, tofu milk, always too hot for me to drink. She sat there and watched me eat, complained to me about your brother's wife, complained of being sick and how no one would help her. Do you know how long it took me to figure out how to call an ambulance? And then when they came, she refused to go. I still remember how the 2 men stared at me, as if I could move a country. Listen, it's the wind. That's the same wind from your countries. Sometimes, if I listen closely at night, I can hear you drop a small bag at the door. I hear the sound of the bough touching the ground and the wind trying to open the bag. But when I open the door, there's nothing there. Just the same wind, thousands of years old. Happy birthday, wind. Happy birthday, mother. April 6, 1940. I know this now. All the nurses, doctors, and morticians asked me, so I memorized it. Your American birthday. April 6, 1940. I said again and again, as if I had known this my whole life. Then I just kept on writing letters. Dear grandmother, dear father, dear, I don't even remember, teacher, dear random people that had influenced me in my journey. And and a lot of things about myself too. So the book has a little bit of a memoir feel in that way. At some point, I started putting in photos, but then they didn't feel like they were that interesting. So then I started writing poems and put them on photos, but then they didn't look very good. And I remember Dana, who's here tonight, telling me they don't look that great. You might want to do this or that. And I think it was actually Dana's idea to start writing poems to put on the photos. So let me just show you one that I did. This was probably one of the first ones. It's just a photo of my mother, my sister, and myself, and I just place it on a piece of paper. I'm not a visual artist, so you'll have to accept that. I had to as well. And then I wrote a little poem, and then I ended up landing on it eventually, little slips of paper that were alight. They weren't fastened to the page. And I'll read this one. I hear the phone ringing, but I can't answer it. It is silence calling. And that's a lot about my family was built around silence. And so there are a lot of secrets. I didn't know a lot. And I understand why now, knowing a little bit more about my mother's history, because at some point writing this, after I'd finished all the letters, I remembered that I had interviewed my mother one time. And it was when a cousin of hers from mainland China had actually found the other side of her family, which had obviously bifurcated, and written my mother a letter. And I had asked my mother all these questions if I could record it. And in the process of writing this letter, I remembered it, but I couldn't find the letter or couldn't find the transcription. I dug and dug and dug and dug, and I did eventually find it. So I put them in this book as well, and just transcribed the interview, which the letter was very much so devoid of any emotion. It just kind of went along the history and mapped out the history of China, stuff that I learned in school. And I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read maybe the first 3 little boxes. Me. Have you heard from your relatives in China? Mother. I just found my cousin. She's 2 years younger than me. She just sent me a letter. She's had a very hard life. She has 3 daughters. And then she translates the letter. 1950. Cousin and family moved to Hubei and had to learn new thoughts. 1950 to 1959. Every 2 to 3 days, they had to participate in new movements to suppress the revolution and to fight against the Americans. They had to take all of their pots and metal doors and burn them to make steel. But moving away from farming led to starvation and famine. And then it just keeps going. It literally maps out, again, all the things I learned in my Chinese history classes in school. And there's just no emotion, just a little bit here and there, but it's very, very clinical. And so, there I do more letters.
Victoria, this is Dana. We can't see the screen.
Oh, at all?
No. I mean, I can see a screen that says click to exit full screen, but I can't see any images.
Okay, let me show you. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Hover here. You can? Oh.
Except it's very small. It's not
full. Let me make it larger. Can you see it now?
Yes. No.
No. Okay, so basically
we saw it for a split second.
So basically when I do the present mode, you can't see like the whole thing, like the you can only see a little bit. So let me go and get rid of this, and let me actually go to a PDF because you may actually be able to see that better. But let me stop sharing. Okay, I do this for a living, so it should be no problem. I say, let's see. Can you see that? I assume you can see that, right, Dana? You can see it full size?
Yep, we're all seeing it.
Woo! Cool. All right, so this is not quite as nice as the Canva directly from Canva, but here's where we left off. You can see that, right? There's a photo in the middle and there are little slips of paper. I feel like I'm talking to walkie-talkie. I'm waiting for the response.
We can totally see this.
All right, so I'll read this to you. This is a photo of my And I don't know who this is a photo of, I'm guessing. So my mother is above in the middle. And then I think that person in the middle looks a lot like us. So I think she's probably my mother's grandmother. So here's the poem I wrote in response to this photo. Again, very much so inspired by what Dana told me to do, which is write poems in response to the photos. Once you had to stand behind your grandmother who left a country, each of your feet lifted off the land onto the boat like nightingales. I imagine the night sky, you below deck, light coming from 2 moons, but only half of your face lit up. You stood still as the moons rearranged themselves. During the switch, language was lost at sea. When language belongs to no one, a door opens. And I'll just show you what I was reading from before. Here's one, and then this is the other one. And then at some point, I found a whole bunch of funny things. Like my dad worked at Ford Motor Company his whole life, and I found all these letters, like year after year, that said that he had perfect attendance, which is an awful strange thing to measure to begin with. But he had multiple years where he had perfect attendance. And then I had a lot of guilt because I was thinking about what I was doing in 1994, which was definitely not making his life easier, right? And so I wrote some poems, little poems related to this. Here's one. Was this your first job? Look at the window behind you as if leaving a country was all perspective and light. I wonder what is in your hand. It's so thin and small, it must be my home. And I put a little imprint on I kind of put my thumb on there to mimic sort of him holding the card. And then, I play around with other sorts of things that all throughout the book. So there are all sorts of things like this that are transcriptions of my mother's conversation with me, and then other poems that I write. It's a little bit of a mishmash because it was very organic of a process. And maybe I'll just stop. I'll read maybe one more poem from OBIT just because I'm so accustomed to reading from this book. It makes me feel a little more at ease. And then I'll let Dana and myself have a conversation. America died on February 14, 2018. And I should say this one references the Marjorie Stoneman shooting in Florida. And my dead mother doesn't know. Since her death, America has died, a series of small deaths, each one less precise than the next. My tears are now shaped like hooks, but my heart is damp still. If it is lucky, it is in the middle of its beats. The unlucky dead children hold telegrams they must hand to a woman at a desk. The woman will collect their belongings in shadows. My dead mother asks each of these children if they know me, have seen me, how tall my children are now. They will tell her that they once lived in Florida, not California. She will see the child with a hole in his head. She will blow the dreams out of the hole like dust. I used to think death was a kind of anesthesia. Now I imagine long lines, my mother taking in all the children. I imagine her touching their hair, how she might tickle their knees to make them laugh. The dead hold the other half of our ticket. The dead are an image of wind. And when they comb their hair, our trees rustle. Thank you. Stop sharing. And then, where's Dana? Are you gonna come back?
I am here.
Okay, now I feel better.
It's so wonderful to hear this work. Friends out there who I cannot see, I saw this book in various drafts and watched it develop, and it's just amazing. It's such a privilege and so amazing to be able to do that with another writer, especially when a book transforms as much as this book transformed, both in terms of the writing and in terms of the graphics. And you talked a little bit, Victoria, about the development of the visuals, but what were the formal challenges for you in terms of this arriving out of OBIT? Because it really does feel like it arrives very naturally out of OBIT. And there's a bit, OBIT is very much about the encounter with death and the encounter with loss, and this constellation of feelings we label grief. This book also feels like it's attempts at reclamation, and the grief is different because you realize certain things cannot be reclaimed. And I'm fascinated by the beginning of the book where you say, I want to know things that are really about history and geopolitical history, but then you also talk about the details of a life. Did you carry a stone? You know, what about the salty plums we both love? So what, like, how did it feel to work on this book? And what were some of the challenges of working on this book emotionally?
Sure. I mean, you know how hard it is to work on
I do.
any book and to write anything. We struggle. And yeah, I mean, OBIT felt like it was a struggle in a different way. But I mean, it's also really hard when you really resist. Like I resisted writing any of this kind of material into your memory for so long. Um, and you know like some of the childhood stuff, you know, I was totally bullied when I was a kid, and you know you realize that you kind of were presenting this false narrative, and to actually write about it is sort of reclaiming yourself and your identity, and finally admitting that you've been lying to not only yourself but everyone else that you've met, that you've had this great childhood, everything was so wonderful. And so it felt really traumatic to actually write about those things, and embarrassing. Like I felt a lot of embarrassment while I was writing, and shame, and all sorts of emotions. And yeah, and so I think it was very hard, and I didn't want to. You know, I also was aware that I had written a whole book called Obit, and people, and I, you know, you and I may talk about this. People have been calling me very prolific lately, and I've been thinking about what that means. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I started writing Obit in 2016 and finished pretty much in 2018. And so I think I started Dear Memory in maybe like a year after that. So started in 2019 and finished it recently, you know, whenever I had to turn it in. And so um, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work I write is really, I don't know if I'm prolific. I feel like these two books are kind of one book, you know, in some ways. And you described it as like Dear Memory as a branch of a tree of obit that's sort of grown into its own tree. And I love that because I think that's really what it is. And it's grappling with the fact that when someone dies, it's like obit was just an investigation or distillation of grief. But when I realized, what I realized later when I opened these boxes is, oh, my whole history's gone, you know, and I wish I would have asked more questions when all these people were able to talk to me, because it evaporated. And before, it didn't matter if I didn't know any of my relatives, and I didn't know anything because, like, my mom and my dad encapsulated that all. But when they're gone, I'm like, "Oh, you know, actually, a whole part of me is dead too." And that was really devastating to think about. And 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 the fact that I look the way I do, it was really devastating to think that, "Oh, now I'm just an American," you know? And before I had this whole other branch of history that maybe I didn't need to know all the details about because my mother represented that. And so, yeah, it was painful to write about, but I also am glad I did.
Yeah. I think that so many children of immigrants have this experience. I mean, my parents were both first generation Americans. My grandparents, they all came over from Russia and Poland, Jews fleeing oppression, and uh, nobody wanted to talk about the old country. Nobody. And then you get old enough where all of a sudden you have questions and you are curious about your background. And sometimes for some of us, there's no one left to ask. Even
Mhm.
when you do get information. I have a cousin who's deep into genealogy and found out that my mother's father's, my maternal grandfather's side of the family, tons of rabbis and Jewish mystic teachers, going back generations. And I'm fascinated. And my sister
Mhm.
is a psychic counselor. I mean, we're all
Right.
very interested in the mysticism. There's nobody to talk to about this lineage. And then that
Mhm.
becomes its own kind of grief, right? Its
Sure
own
does. Yeah.
kind of loss.
Right.
So,
But you can't hurry yourself along to think, you just don't care. When you don't care, you don't care. When you care, you care.
well,
Doesn't
then,
time
what
itself right.
takes the place? The guest receipts, the letter from Ford Motor Company, all the documents you found, they become like these precious things, even though they seem so innocuous and even funny, like the stuff from Ford Motor Company. It actually makes me think of one of my favorite moments in the book, where it's on page 66. You're talking about your work life before you totally gave over to poetry, which we are all so glad you did. And you're talking about, oh, sorry, page 64 is where it starts. You're working in an office environment, and you're working with a very classically, what would seem a classic American white Protestant blonde, athletic, beautiful specimen, right, of Americanness. And there's a whole conversation about how you know if a pearl is real. And so this woman is giving you advice. And but then in your reverie, you talk about your mother buying jewelry from QVC and finding some of that jewelry after she's died. And you say, can you read on page 66 the last three paragraphs, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay, sure.
Cool.
I also found some jade jewelry and jade animals. I've always avoided jade because it represented something Chinese. To assimilate meant that I rebuffed everything Chinese, especially jade, especially red. I put a jade fish in my purse for good luck, the same fish my mother had once given me that I never took. I found a gold ring with 3 rubies in one of the boxes. Maybe they weren't real rubies. Maybe the ring wasn't really gold. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe there is no real anything. I slipped the ring on my 4th finger, but it was too big. I put it on my middle finger and haven't taken it off since. Throughout the day, I look at it often and marvel at its fakeness that is both luminous and real.
I love that, and marvel at its fakeness that is both luminous and real. And it's followed by this graphic, which I don't know, maybe it's backwards for people. But in it, there is this scene about, you say, when did your father leave? He was one of the last to leave. When he left, there was money all over the ground, jewelry, gold, everywhere. So these people are just pushing and rushing in great fear to get on this boat and to get away. And all of these things that we tend to think of as being valuable are just scattered on the ground. And I was thinking about how so much of what this book is about is what really is value? What really are riches? What is quote unquote gold in the end in terms of what matters? So I just found that striking, that this ring of fake rubies is something that matters to you, and it's luminous and real. Did you have that experience like over and over again? Like when you found the Ford Motor Company letters, where you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, so much of my coming of age was looking toward other things and that other people had that were supposed to be ideals and the ways that I was supposed to behave. And I think that this, looking back at, this thing, that this particular one, which is Dear T, I was so traumatized by the fact that someone had realized that I was wearing a fake diamond, and I didn't even have enough knowledge to know that it was, like, I hadn't really thought about it. Just my mom liked shopping on QVC and buying these diamondiques, and so I bought one, and to be called out like that in public, and it felt like I felt ashamed that I didn't really feel more anger about that, and didn't feel a necessity to call anyone out, or I just ended up feeling like oh yeah, just took my natural place in society, which is a secondary, second-class citizen, if not more, and so or lower. Um, and it took me my whole life to realize, whoa, wait, maybe like that's not the value. Just like you said, maybe I shouldn't be chasing what other people value, other people who I'm not even like, and maybe I don't need to be like them anymore. But it really does take a lifetime for some of us, to get to that point, and then it's continuous growth thereafter. But yeah, it took my mother to die, and that's what makes me feel particularly sad, because it's like I think to myself sometimes, it doesn't make sense. Like maybe if I had come to that sooner, or done this or that, she wouldn't have died. I mean, it makes no sense. Obviously, there's no logic to that, whatever. But that's sort of, the like, I think kids and daughters and children think that the logic is never logical. Um, and, but yeah, I mean, when my mother died, I learned a lot about myself. And I think that one thing I did learn is I kind of wished that I had been a faster learner, but I also recognize that there's no way for me to have learned any of those things if she had stayed alive.
Well, how can you, right, in a situation? You talk a lot about silence. I mean, I love, there's that moment where you say silence. What is it? I bumped into it like furniture, or I was
Mhm.
constantly bumping into it. And silence feels like a kind of palpable, oppressive reality, especially in childhood. But I'm also wondering, was it ever like a solace or an imaginative place? Like, what was your relationship to solid or silence as a child and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think, and Rick Barrett actually said this when I was doing an event with him maybe 2 days ago. Is like the book has a trajectory, and I hadn't really thought about it, because as the writer, you don't really know what you're doing consciously. But he said he called it the silence journey. So it's like at the beginning of the book, the silence is considered a bad thing, and but by the end of the book, you realized, and what you write about at the end in the last letter to the reader is that it's what actually poets are writing toward. We're writing toward silence, and so I thought about that too. I was like, yeah, there is a trajectory to the book in terms of silence, and how right at the beginning, it's like the questions were just flooding into me. I wanted answers to all of these questions, and by the end, I realized, oh no, that space, that's empty space wasn't empty, and I filled it all with imagination. And looking back on it, I spent so much time being quiet as a kid, observing and thinking and watching, and was so quiet, like for genetically a very chatty human. Like I was very quiet. I'm so chatty. I drive everyone around me
I can
insane. Um,
testify.
that's right. I am so chatty. Like I get so many eye rolls from people who live in this house on a daily basis to just calm down and stop talking. But I think I spent a lot of my childhood in silence, and I think that was a great empty field to imagine things. So I'm grateful now, but it takes a lifetime to be grateful for all things that happen to you.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think about too, we're both teachers, and I was really interested in the letters to teachers and your experience with teachers. And there's one where I love this moment. It's on page 44. Um, where you say, "Dear teacher, you read us so many poems, so much Shakespeare, had us memorize so many poems that I never became American, but I became a writer." Can you talk about that?
What the hell does that mean
Well, I
exactly?
love it, and it feels
Yeah.
true, but what is that?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this because I'm working on some other stuff right now. And something that that happens a lot when you're writing is that, at least to me, I'm sure it happens to you and other people that I see that I know are writers that are watching us, is that you're writing stuff and then it's like, it doesn't always make sense. Like you don't actually know, but you kind of like it. So you keep it, even though it doesn't quite make sense. And that happens a lot, I think, for me. And, but yeah, I mean, I think that looking back on my education, gosh, that was one hell of a great teacher. But you know, she just taught us so much Dickinson and had us memorize so much stuff and had us read so much Shakespeare. And you know, it's like I looking back on it, I was like, wow, that was a pretty sort of one-sided kind of curriculum. Um, and it's like, I guess one could say a lot of the curriculum is trying to kind of make us, you know, those of us that maybe weren't born in like a traditional, conventional American family, and actually all of us, to sort of school back in the day, it was more about getting you to be what they wanted you to be. And even just selecting the readings and everything we do as teachers is interesting because you don't really think about how much you're defining someone's life or how they read. Um, Actually, I didn't until obviously I became a teacher. So I think I thought about that in the way that even though she tried and curriculum tries to make us certain things, it's at the end of the day, it never really worked on me. At least. But
Well,
I became a writer
I think
instead. I guess I
what
don't know. I'm not explaining myself.
I'm most fascinated by it in that moment is that it seems as if you never quite felt at home as an American, you did start to feel at home in poetry.
Mhm.
And I'm so curious about that. I was wondering if you would talk about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I mean, for me, language is a country, and I feel like you know, even though I mean, this is English is my, you know, I would say first-ish language, even though Chinese was the same at the same time. So I learned two languages at the same time. But it's like, and I had to make my own language because there are constantly things that, especially the phrases like the straw that broke the camel's back. I didn't learn any of that stuff. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I had a colleague once at my work at Antioch who was just an expert. Like she knew every single one and more, and really weird ones, obscure ones, and we joke about that all the time. How I knew, like, I know one, the straw that broke the camel's back, and I couldn't even tell you another one right now. I couldn't pull it because my parents never knew that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think language for me was a comfortable place to make a new identity, like make myself, because there wasn't anything around me that I could model myself after. Certainly not my parents, and certainly not the people that I grew up with. And so, what are you stuck with? Well, I have to make myself, and you know, to make something from scratch is a lot harder than one would imagine, especially if you don't have any role models to look up to.
Yeah. So, would you say that class was the first time that you started to wake up to language? And did you start writing during that time, or did you just wake up to a life of reading?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had this when you were young, but like in our elementary school, and I went to great public schools in Michigan, and they had these little contests, and so they made us all enter the contest, and everybody was first, second, or third place, and so we wrote these little poems, and I was always quote unquote winning, and it felt great because I'm very competitive. I will admit that fully. But I think that I enjoyed writing poems, and like I kind of always have been sort of imagistic and metaphorical and figurative wise. It just the way I thought about the world, and so it was very easy. And I always had a little bit of subversive, sarcastic humor, and so even little poems I wrote when I was in second grade, I thought, oh, there's a little bit of that. I can see that Victoria Chang is in that little poem. But that's when I started writing poetry and understood what poetry was. And we didn't have, you know, that many English books in our house. You know, a lot of and not literature. So a lot of Chinese books actually, and encyclopedias, more like reference books. Cause like my parents didn't know the language. And so lots of dictionaries for sure. And so, yeah, that's when I started writing. But like when I got to high school, wow, this teacher, phew, I mean, she loved poetry and she loved Emily Dickinson. So that really, I didn't love it along with her at the time, but it got me going for sure.
Well, this helps me understand even more when you said, language for you is a country. It's like, it's a place that becomes yours, especially
Mhm.
because it's English, and it's a place that you get to hold that actually your parents can't really enter
Right.
in the way that you are learning how to enter.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So it becomes like a little escape pod and a little safe house and a little
Mhm.
play place. And I love that idea of thinking about language as a place that you can enter. Did they ever respond to your life in poetry as you began to publish and things like that?
Not really. I remember my mom once saying when I gave her a copy of my third book, which is The Boss, and she at some point one time just said, "Oh, you write about your dad a lot." And it seemed kind of like I'm sure lots of family members just kind of scratch their head. Like I don't think people understand writers. They don't understand our impulse and need to write. Like they just don't get it. And so, yeah, I don't think anyone ever read anything, which thank God.
Well, I think I had a similar experience with my own parents, though. Uh, I did make the mistake of showing my mother one of my first poems that was ever published in Plowshares, my first big publication while I was in grad school, and it was all about my insane rager father. And she was like, "How could you do this to us?" I'll never
Mhm.
forget that conversation.
Mhm.
Um, so there's perils in letting the family know
Ugh,
that you're writing about them.
so many perils.
Um,
Yeah.
so, would you say that your experience with teachers turned you into a teacher?
I have to say that my experience with teachers made me think how hard it would be to be a teacher and how draining it would be emotionally to be a teacher. And my natural tendency is to be a giver. And so I think I avoided it for a long time because I was afraid that I would give too much of myself away. But I've come to the conclusion that I'm naturally a person that likes to give a lot of myself away because um, I feel like I needed mentors when I was younger, so I didn't have those opportunities when I was younger. So now I try and mentor as many people as I can, and help other people as much as I can within reason. But it makes a lot more sense to me now. But I think before I just was trying to protect as much of my life as possible,
Yeah.
and
Hey,
but now I
Victoria,
realize, yeah,
you vanished from the screen,
I did.
or at
Am I
least
still here?
from my screen.
Really? I'm still here. Let's see.
Really? Uh-oh.
Hold on.
Did I do something? Oh, no.
Let's see. Let me go back. Let me come back.
Okay. Maybe
I
it's
think other
me.
people still see us, but can you see me now?
I
Yeah.
can't, but that's okay. I guess I
How
did something
weird.
weird.
Other
Hmm.
people can see both of us. I know I
I'm
hate
gonna turn
crowdcasts
myself off and
because
turn myself back on.
you're gone now. She may have left altogether.
No, no, I'm here. Here I am, but I still can't
There you go. Oh,
see.
now we're waiting for
Okay.
you're still here.
All right. Well, I'm just looking at your avatar. I'm not sure why this happened.
Oh, well, you just have to
Oh,
imagine.
no, there you are.
Oh my. Okay.
You're back. All right. So, I'm going to ask you, let's see, I'm going to ask you one more question. And then if people, we have one question in Ask a Question. But if anybody else has questions, please put them in the Ask a Question box and we'll attempt to get to what we can. Victoria, do you feel like, I mean, I know you have a book of poetry coming out in April, which is very different from this experience, what you've done here. Um, is there anything else in this book that you feel like you want to keep going with or that you keep wondering about?
Um, Not really. I'm I mean, I really struggled with this book. I actually wrote a piece for Poets and Writers magazine about how freaking hard this book was to put together because I didn't know what I was doing, and it was never obviously intended to be a book. And then it was a mishmash. Dana saw me through this process. I sent it to you several times. And even to this day, I'm not exactly sure what it's doing, but I'm okay with that now. At some point, I even asked my visual arts friend, the great visual artist Monica Ong, for help. And I'm like, hey, this is really ugly. Can you help me fix this? And we actually had really great conversations about some of the visual pieces because, like, as if we were workshopping the pieces that I made. And I made them, I remade them. Like the little pieces of paper were everywhere. I wrote them in different size. I mean, I have so many pens. I tried all the different sizes and different pens. I was like, that's 0.3, no, 0.05, 0.8, rewrote them. I mean, it was a disaster in the making. And I was so frazzled. And the publisher asked me for the final manuscript, and I didn't even know it was due because I wasn't paying attention. So, and also, like, I mean, and the whole prolific comment too, it's like, I mean, I'm writing more than I normally have in the past, for sure. But sometimes the way books come out is very much so not based. Like if you're like me and you just sort of sit back and just take a back seat to your whole life, pretty much, people will just start putting things in slots for you. And I didn't really realize that, Dear Memory is going to come out in 2021. OBIT was 2020. Dear Memory is 2021. And I have a book of tiny little poems coming out in 2022. Like that was totally unplanned. And if I had more, if I were more in the driver's seat of my life, I would probably have spread those out a little bit. But because I'm learning how to be better about things like that. But in general, it's like, these 3 books are probably written over a period of six years or so, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, 6 or 7 years. But they all kind of jam together because of the publishing schedules, which is fascinating, actually. So, but this book, Dear Memory, I'm good. I'm done.
Well, I so admire the way in which with every book, there's just going to be a new structural angle. So, when you look at these 3 books, right? When you look at Obit and Dear Memory and the Trees book, what's the title again?
The Trees Witness Everything.
The Trees Witness Everything. I mean, these are such wildly different books from a structural standpoint. And I love that. I love the flexibility. I love that sense of play. I love the bravery of doing that. And I mean, is part of it just not wanting to be bored, I want to try something different.
Yeah, no, I think I have that personality naturally. It's like I get so bored so fast. But the bravery aspect is real. I mean, I think that you have to be really thick-skinned to do stuff like that, and sort of unapologetic, because you will be criticized. And like I had this conversation with you. It's like, of all of our mutual friends, I feel like I have been nailed to the wall many times more than any of you all have. And I think it's because I push the limit sometimes too much, and I get criticized for it by certain kinds of readers. And it hurts every time you get a crappy review or something. It stings. Yeah, and sometimes it's racist, there's a review recently that said something about, they use the words cool intellectual distance. And I found that to be, I remember nothing else about that review, but that's all I remember. And I was like, that's pretty damn racist if you're directing it toward an Asian American writer. You're totally buying into the stereotypes of what people think are Asian American women, that have been called cold and callous and emotionless a million times by the time they're my age. And then it also made me wonder, it's like, did this person read this book? Because I feel like it's actually very emotional, And so you just risk that every time you try something new. But those are the perils of writing and publishing. And if I would have known it would have been like this, I probably would have never published anything.
No kidding.
So painful.
No, it is.
You're putting yourself out there for
Yeah.
people they take their bow and arrows and they take shots at you. It's really crazy. Yeah.
Well, I love this book.
You don't have to say that, but thank you.
I do. All right, let's see what questions we have.
All right.
Here's a question from Laura. I have been thinking about using old letters and have worried about appropriation of my deceased family stemming from their words. It seems that answering letters is a way to honor their work. Am I right to think this way about appropriation?
Mm-hmm. That's Dana.
That's from Laura.
Do you have thoughts?
Do I have thoughts about this?
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that? I have thoughts too.
Answering letters is an interesting thing. Can you talk about that? Can you talk
Sure.
about writing letters that you don't get answered?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think appropriation is something that we should kind of be thinking about. I mean, it's very difficult to write about anyone. I think memoirists have this problem all the time. I think when you're writing fiction, you have that problem too. And I think that you know, even and we saw with the kidney story, you know, appropriation is a really serious thing that one must think about in this day and age, but also always. But I think that what I always say to everyone, sometimes students, sometimes other people who ask me this question is like, you know, we're writers. We have to honor ourselves first. And like sometimes what we do is we silence ourselves, and then like, is that really healthy? So there's a balance somewhere. I feel like we can, you know, write about other people and even, you know, even appropriate some of those deceased families' letters, but do it in a way I think that honors them and honors you and your writing process and your own creativity. Because I think it's such a shame if we close ourselves off and we have that impulse to write. But some things that I've done in this book is I change details. I use dear Y, dear C. I you know, I try and make people totally unrecognizable. Sometimes I modify things so that I change facts and stuff like that. And then I put a little acknowledgments at the end. I've tried to recreate events, locales, and conversations, you know, from my memories of them, and to protect the privacy of the people involved. You know, I think you can only do so much. And if people feel no matter what you do, they'll still feel like you sort of dishonored them, because I think it's jarring to have yourself written about. And so it's just a part of the process, I think, of being a writer.
Yeah. And also, you know, the thing about it too is that there's not one prescription for everyone.
Right.
I mean, you had one way of moving into this material, but someone else may find a completely different way of doing it. So that's where, you know, advice about making art can only go so far.
Totally.
You know, because,
Yeah.
You know, you can't, you are the captain of the ship, basically,
That's right.
ultimately, you know, and you're going to have to figure out how to make it happen. Though, you know, it's always interesting to look at how other people have, you know, addressed it. Nicole asked, can you talk a little bit about narrative distance? Grief can be such an unwieldy, lifelong process. I'm wondering if you have any insights on how to make formal decisions or reach conclusions for your pieces, i.e., how you knew certain pieces were finished, even if certain feelings were ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't really know. Like, that's a great question about poetry too. Like, how do you know when to end a poem? And I'll tell you what I do. Like when I'm writing a poem or when I was writing these letters, is that I just keep going. Like I just keep going, and I don't care how long it is, or I just stop when I feel like stopping. I don't know if that's too organic and too amorphous for you, Nicole, but I feel like yeah, I feel like, and I feel too, it's like sometimes I think of everything as a process of discovery. So I'm kind of learning as I go, and then sometimes when I think I've stopped writing, I look and see where I ended up, and I think, wow, why am I here? Because I didn't start writing about where I ended, and then. But I'm okay with that. Like I don't actually go back and change the beginning to make it seem like there's any logic to it. But I just sort of, yeah. And I always tell my students too, like something I say more often than not is I say, keep going, because I think there's a tendency, if anything, for all of us to stop too early. And when we reach like a really clean, palpable, or maybe palpable is another, clean, clear conclusion, that's when you actually want to say, all right, keep going. Because then that's when you start, that's actually maybe when things starting.
Yeah. Well, I think about that famous thing from Chekhov where he says, cut off the beginnings and ends of your stories, because that's where you do the most lying. And when you think about that, it's because introductions and conclusions are so false to life. I mean, you're just going, and experience is just happening. And when you have to actually put a conclusion to something, or even an introduction to something, sometimes that's like a really kind of a weird thing to do. And it's where persona comes forward versus self, right? Oh, I gotta gussy this up, kind of thing.
Right.
Also, in terms of narrative distance, I'm just thinking about, Nicole, working with form in general is a way of taking hot feeling and making it manageable. And, just the form of, I'm going to write letters. I'm going to work with this found material. That is the distraction. And then the feelings just come through.
Right.
And I actually think it's a mistake when you're like, I will now write about the death of my mother, or I will now write about my grief. I think those things will just start to come through you when they want to be heard. And the best distraction in the world is to invent and create containers for these feelings.
Right.
And the containers will come as an intuition. Or like OBIT, like how did the OBITs come to your mind, Victoria? Like when did you decide that was the form you were going to write those poems in?
Yeah, when I heard that on NPR, they were talking about that documentary OBIT, that word just got me thinking about obituaries and how, gosh, when your mother dies, everything dies. And then I went home and I really literally went home and then I wrote for 2 weeks straight. And I think sometimes I get accused, and it is a word. I really do. I get accused of writing project books. And I don't think people recognize how little of my process is completely unplanned. And it just looks neat after it's all done. But the obituary form got me writing. It was like a little prompt. It's like, it was so much easier to start writing about something very emotionally difficult to write about when you can say, Victoria Chang died on March 15th, 2025. Okay, I started writing, and then all the feelings flood out, but you don't know where the poem's going or anything. And then, I also get accused, and I say accused also, of being too consistent. And I was thinking, well, I made them consistent, but I could easily vary all of these and take off the Victoria Chang died, the frontal part, and just make them look different on a page. And I wouldn't be accused of that anymore. But I think what people realize, I choose to make these decisions, like at the end, like putting them in like the skinny form and then making them all the same was actually a formal choice that I made.
Well,
just like when people do couplets or tercets or stuff like that.
Well, and the book, the thing about it is that the books have structural variation inside them.
Sure.
I mean, even in Dear Memory, we have all these letters, but then we have these collages too.
Right.
The poems that are inside them, and the Q&As that are inside them, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have one more question. Where could it be?
Let's see.
Which comes first, content or form? I guess maybe we sort of, did we answer that? I don't know. Do they come together?
I think it depends. Yeah. I think for OBIT, the not the form, but the prompt. So the very first one I wrote was The Bees Died. I don't know what page it's on, but it's toward the end. And it was really short. And I think, page 96, The Bees Died. And I changed this a whole bunch by the time it made it in here. Yeah, the bees, 268 million years old from the Philippines, passed away on April 26, 2017 in Nome, Alaska. And that was the first one I wrote. So I think that little tag in the front came first. And then later, by the time I write all by hand, by the time it made it onto a computer was when I was sort of like, oh, but all along, you're sort of, things are always back here and you're just kind of letting them hang out there until you're ready to think about those things. So I think it's very organic. I think the tag came first, the writing came next. You know, to me, the writing's always the most important thing. The writing, the language, the words, and then at some point I start messing with maybe how it might look, and then you can, once you kind of are more set on because the worst thing you do is like set the form if it's like long line, short line, and then you change the words and then you have to redo the whole thing. I had to do that a lot with Barbie Chang. I did that. Yeah, I made that mistake, so I wasn't going to make that mistake again.
Well, that's it, right? Because here we are at home, and what we care most about is the architecture of what we're building. But then the book comes out, and people want to talk about feelings, and psychology, and like handling the emotional life. You're like, no, I want to talk about this building I built, and
That's
like,
right.
hopefully we end up with, a readership that's interested in both things, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And is interested in both things because poetry is capacious. And it can hold so many different kinds of forms. And there's a lot of poetry in this book, Dear Memory. How can there not be? So thank you, Victoria. I hope this was a fun conversation for you.
Oh my God, it was so fun. We could do all sorts of additional chatter, but I think it's probably good to let people go on with their daily lives.
Thank you, everybody who came, and thank you to Women and Children and First. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this incredible book. Thank you to everyone who has actually already ordered the book or is about to. We appreciate all of your purchases to support our store. And thank you for this conversation. Thank you for covering the architecture and the feelings and everything in between. I apologize for the tech issues. I know it's a headache. But someday we will all be in this bookstore without any tech to wrestle with. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you,
That was fun. Have a good night.